A mother's love. We often call it the purest, most powerful force on earth. But what happens when that love gets twisted by voices a mother believes are divine? What happens when faith, a source of comfort for so many, allegedly becomes the reason for an act so horrific it's hard to even comprehend? In a quiet Florida home, a 6-year-old boy was silenced forever. His mother claimed the command came from God himself. This isn't just a story, it's a journey into a dark psychological abyss, a tale of a young life cut tragically short, and a case that makes us face some really uncomfortable questions about belief, mental illness, and the systems that are supposed to protect the most vulnerable among us. Late May 2025. The suburban calm of Fort Pierce, Florida, was absolutely shattered. A discovery was made that sent shockwaves of horror through the community and far beyond. 6-year-old Ra'myl Pierre, a little boy described as someone who could light up a room, was found dead in his own bed. And the person accused of ending his vibrant life? His own mother, 41-year-old Rhonda Paulynice. Her alleged reason, the one she gave to investigators, is chilling. She believed God had told her to exorcise demons out of the child's body. When Ra'myl stopped moving, she reportedly thought the demons were gone and was just waiting for him to come back. This was more than just a tragedy. It was like a perfect storm where faith, alleged psychosis, and unimaginable violence collided, leaving a family devastated and a community struggling to understand how something like this could ever happen. We're going to look into what led up to Ra'myl's death, the psychological turmoil Rhonda Paulynice seemed to be caught in, the legal battle that's now unfolding, and the critical questions this case forces all of us to ask. The first sign something was terribly wrong wasn't a scream in the night. It was an empty chair in a classroom. Ra'myl Pierre hadn't been at Samuel Gaines Academy K-8 since May 14, 2025. As days stretched into more than 2 weeks, concern mounted. It grew enough for a school resource deputy to request a welfare check. On the morning of Friday, May 30th, St. Lucie County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Paulynice home on Bedford Drive. Body cam footage, which was later released, captured the initial interaction. It seemed deceptively calm. Deputies found Rhonda Paulynice outside her home. When they asked about her son and why he hadn't been in school, she casually replied, "Oh, he's going to go back to school." When told about truancy, she even asked what that was. One deputy noted Paulynice was acting oddly and kept her sunglasses on the whole time. As they talked, deputies asked if her son was home and if they could see him, just to make sure he was okay. Paulynice eventually let them inside. She pointed to a bedroom door. A deputy knocked, got no response, and Paulynice allowed them to enter. What they found inside was a scene that would undoubtedly haunt them. Ra'myl was on a bed, reportedly wrapped in fabric with only his face exposed. The deputy who saw him first knew instantly the child was dead. There were signs of decomposition. He'd clearly been deceased for some time. Paulynice then led investigators to her son's bedroom. According to Sheriff Richard Del Toro, she told them she believed God had instructed her to exorcise demons out of the child's body. She reportedly said that when her son stopped moving and died, she felt the child had been released of those demons and was waiting for him to basically come back. Investigators think the homicide happened around May 18th. That's the last day Paulynice said she actually spoke to her son. She allegedly admitted to suffocating R'myl while he was in bed to get rid of an enemy or spirit. Reports say she acknowledged knowing he had died and that she freed him of a spirit he had in him. She also talked about resetting her life and said she was put in a position where she had to take her son's life. After he died, she moved his body to another bed and placed his favorite blanket on him, arranging it around his head. The home itself told a somber story. Investigators noted there weren't many sentimental items, apart from family pictures on the fridge. A garbage bag in the laundry room was filled with clean children's clothes. Before R'myl's body was removed, deputies allowed Paulynice to say goodbye. Her demeanor, as described in arrest records, was distraught, but it didn't seem sincere. Trying to understand Rhonda Paulynice's life leading up to this horror is crucial, though much of her deeper past isn't public knowledge. What we do know paints a fragmented picture. It hints at potential underlying issues, but maybe not the clear, direct warning signs you'd expect before a tragedy like the one involving her son. The St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office did confirm they'd been to the Paulynice home before. These visits were for domestic issues and, significantly, a medical issue involving Paulynice herself on May 17. This date is incredibly disturbing because it was just one day before investigators believe R'myl was killed. While the details of this medical issue haven't been fully shared, its timing is a massive red flag. It immediately raises questions about Paulynice's state of mind in the hours right before the alleged homicide. Was this a missed chance for a more serious intervention? Could an assessment at that moment have changed what happened the next day? Sheriff Del Toro, however, mentioned that these previous calls, including the domestic issues, had nothing involving the child that will lead us to where we're at today. This really highlights a common and incredibly difficult problem for authorities, figuring out when adult-centered problems in a home might escalate and become a direct, lethal threat to a child. Paulynice and R'myl were the only two living in the home. That kind of situation inherently creates an isolated environment. If a caregiver's mental health takes a nosedive in that setting, a child can become exceptionally vulnerable, with fewer people around to notice the escalating danger. Neighbors and relatives have expressed so much anguish, saying things like, "It should have never come to this." This suggests that, at least looking back, there might have been behaviors that worried those who knew the family, even if those worries weren't officially reported to Child Protective Services or law enforcement in a way that triggered a direct intervention for R'myl. These feelings, so common after such tragedies, just underscore the often blurry lines between personal struggles, community support, and official help. Court records show that in November 2019, about 6 months after R'myl was born, steps had been taken that might require his father, Ra'myl Pierre, to pay child support and/or provide health insurance. A child support order was actually put in place in 2020. Records stated, "You have a legal duty to contribute to the support of the child, named above because you are the father." While this gives us a tiny glimpse into the family structure and financial side of things, it doesn't really tell us much about Paulynice's mental state or personal struggles in the years between then and now. The picture that emerges is one of potential, yet perhaps unspoken or unaddressed, vulnerabilities that festered until they erupted in the most devastating way imaginable. May 18, 2025. This is the date investigators believe 6-year-old Ra'myl Pierre took his last breath, killed by his own mother. Rhonda Paulynice's account to investigators paints a horrifying picture of what she claimed happened, a story completely wrapped up in alleged divine instructions and a battle against what she saw as demonic forces. Paulynice told authorities she'd noticed changes in R'myl's behavior. She believed him to be controlled by a spirit and by an enemy that caused him to act out. Investigators, however, have reportedly said that the changes she described actually seemed normal for a child his age. This difference is critical. What a mother interpreted as demonic possession, others might just see as typical childhood development. It shows the subjective and potentially delusional way Paulynice was seeing her son. On that terrible day, acting on what she claimed were instructions from God/Father, Paulynice said she performed an exorcism. She told investigators she put her hand over R'myl's mouth and started suffocating him as he was kicking and screaming in bed. This detail is absolutely harrowing. It strips away any idea of a peaceful or harmless ritual and reveals a violent struggle. She admitted that she knew her son had died, stating that she freed him of a spirit he had in him. Her statements about divine instruction were consistent. She claimed God/Father told her what to do, and when she tried to resist, he would make her pay, though she didn't explain what those threats meant. She also mentioned being kept awake at night by dreams from God/Father that detailed events that were going to happen. This suggests a pattern of perceived communication from a divine being, a common feature in cases involving religious delusions and command hallucinations, when someone hears voices, often God or a spirit, telling them to do things. After R'myl died, Paulynice's actions continued to be guided by her warped reality. She moved his body to another bed and wrapped him in his favorite blanket, placing it on him and around his head. Then, according to her, she waited for him to come back, a statement she made to Sheriff Del Toro. She reportedly checked him for signs of life every day, even blowing warm air on his face to see if he would respond. This grotesque imitation of care, performed on her deceased child, just underscores the profound break from reality she seemed to be experiencing. She preserved his body, not like someone trying to hide a crime, but seemingly in genuine, although delusional, hope for his resurrection. For nearly 2 weeks, from May 18th until the welfare check on May 30th, R'myl lay dead in his room while his mother, apparently trapped in her own psychological nightmare, held on to this belief. During this time, after her son was likely already dead, Paulynice reportedly made numerous social media posts, a chilling contrast between ordinary online activity and the unbelievably grim reality inside her home. Rhonda Paulynice's case forces us to look at that terrifying place where profound religious belief, or its distortion, crashes into severe mental illness. Her claim that God told me to kill my son is the central, horrifying point around which this whole tragedy spins. It demands that we try to understand the psychological dynamics that could lead someone to say such a thing, and then do such a thing. Religious delusions are a known, though complex and often misunderstood, part of some psychotic illnesses. These aren't just deeply held religious beliefs. They're fixed, false beliefs that aren't shared by others in the person's culture and often involve themes of being special, being persecuted, or, like in this case, divine communication and instructions, sometimes called command hallucinations. Research shows that religious delusions can be linked to higher levels of grandiosity and experiences where a person feels their thoughts or actions are being controlled by an outside force. Paulynice's statement to investigators that she wasn't in control of her vessel, her body, and that God, or the Father, controlled her, lines up disturbingly well with this. Figuring out the difference between fervent religious faith and a pathological delusion is a huge challenge, both for doctors and for the legal system. Generally, a belief is considered delusional when it's peculiar, held onto tightly despite evidence to the contrary, and leads to significant distress or problems in functioning, often alongside other symptoms of mental illness. Paulynice's belief that God was telling her to perform a lethal exorcism on her 6-year-old son, and her expectation that he would come back after she killed him, strongly suggests a break from reality that goes way beyond conventional religious practice. Her behavior during the investigation, which Sheriff Del Toro described as swinging from laughing to crying at the scene, hints at emotional dysregulation. This can be a symptom of various serious mental health conditions. This emotional volatility, combined with her chillingly calm statements about divine commands, paints a picture of a mind in absolute turmoil. That medical issue, the sheriff's office responded to at her home on May 17th, just 1 day before R'myl is believed to have been killed, looms large. We don't know the specifics, but its timing is undeniably significant. It represents a potential moment when her deteriorating mental state might have been noticeable to authorities. Was this a sign of the psychosis that allegedly led to the tragedy? Could an intervention at this point, maybe a psychiatric evaluation or emergency hospitalization, have prevented the horror of the next day? These are painful questions, but necessary ones. Studies on filicide, a parent killing their child, when motivated by religious delusions, suggest a complex mix of pre-existing mental illness, specific psychological vulnerabilities, and the role religion plays in the individual's mind, sometimes as a twisted defense mechanism. Some research points out that delusions are especially important when looking at violence by the mentally ill, and religious delusions have been noted in women who kill children. The theory is that some mothers with religious delusions commit filicide because of a dynamic interaction between their mental illness, their overall psychological functioning, and the specific psychological role their religious beliefs have come to play. The idea of a deific decree, where a person believes God has commanded them to kill, has a long and troubled history in legal and psychiatric discussions. Courts and mental health professionals wrestle with whether such a belief comes from genuine religious conviction or is a symptom of a severe mental disorder that makes the person unable to understand that their actions are wrong. In Paulynice's case, her belief that she was freeing him of a spirit, and her expectation of his resurrection suggests a profound inability to grasp the finality and wrongfulness of her actions, at least not through a rational lens. This psychological abyss is where the seeds of this tragedy took root, watered by alleged divine commands that led to an earthly hell. After R'myl Pierre's body was discovered on May 30, 2025, Rhonda Paulynice was arrested. She's now facing a string of serious charges: second-degree murder, failure to report a death, and willfully touching or moving a body, or, as some reports put it, altering a dead body. During her first court appearance on Saturday, May 31st, she was denied bail on the murder charge, a decision that really underscores how serious these allegations are. She remains in the St. Lucie County Jail. The legal proceedings are, as of now, in their very early stages. A critical part of this case will undoubtedly be Paulynice's mental state at the time of the alleged crime. Her claims about hearing God's voice, performing an exorcism, and believing her son would be resurrected point directly towards a potential insanity defense. The deific decree doctrine, though viewed differently in different places and sometimes criticized for being too narrow, specifically deals with situations where a defendant claims they acted on a command from God. To establish such a defense, you usually have to show that, because of a severe mental disease or defect, the defendant couldn't understand the nature or wrongfulness of their actions. Paulynice's public defender hasn't publicly detailed a specific defense strategy yet, but the circumstances of the case make her mental competency a central issue. Preliminary autopsy findings, which the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office shared on June 3, reportedly do not refute the mother's account of the events surrounding Ra'myl Pierre's death. However, officials also stressed that these results aren't final and that the medical examiner's investigation, including toxicology testing and other analyses, is still ongoing. Paulynice had told investigators she suffocated her son. If the final autopsy confirms asphyxiation as the cause of death, it would line up with her confession. But it wouldn't resolve the question of her criminal culpability that hinges on her mental state. The legal system faces a huge challenge in cases like this. How does the law assign responsibility when someone's actions seem to be driven by delusions so powerful they override the most fundamental human instincts, like a mother's instinct to protect her child? Courts will lean heavily on the testimony of psychiatrists and psychologists to assess Paulynice's mental condition at the time of the offense. These experts will scrutinize her history, her statements, her behavior, and any evidence of pre-existing mental illness to form an opinion on whether she was legally insane. The fact that Paulynice preserved her son's body and waited for him to come back could be seen in different ways. Legally, it might support an argument that she didn't fully grasp the permanence and wrongfulness of her actions, a key part of an insanity defense. However, the prosecution will likely argue that, regardless of her beliefs, she intentionally took a life. The charge of second-degree murder suggests the state believes she acted with a depraved mind, indifference to human life, or ill will, even if the act wasn't premeditated in the way first-degree murder requires. The additional charges of failing to report a death and improperly handling a body address her actions in those nearly 2 weeks between R'myl's death and when his body was found. This legal battle will be complex and emotionally charged, trying to navigate the murky waters where alleged divine command, severe mental illness, and the letter of the law all collide. The tragic death of Ra'myl Pierre, allegedly at the hands of his mother, Rhonda Paulynice, isn't just an isolated incident of horrific violence. It's a case that throws a harsh spotlight on potential cracks and failures within our society's safety nets. It makes us ask some really tough questions about how, and if, this could have been prevented. One of the most glaring issues is the timeline of R'myl's school absence. He hadn't been to Samuel Gaines Academy since May 14th, and the welfare check that led to finding his body didn't happen until May 30th. That's more than 2 weeks. While schools have rules for truancy, this long absence raises questions about how quickly and how effectively follow-ups happen when a young child seemingly vanishes from the education system. In an age where we're all more aware of child welfare, could there have been a more immediate intervention triggered by his prolonged and unexplained absence? Every day that passed was another day R'myl was potentially in an increasingly dangerous environment. The sheriff's office's prior contact with Rhonda Paulynice, especially that medical issue on May 17, just a day before R'yl is believed to have been killed, is another critical point to consider. Details are scarce, but this interaction was a direct engagement with authorities at a moment when Paulynice may have been in acute psychological distress. Was this a missed opportunity for a more thorough mental health assessment or emergency intervention that could have protected both her and her son? Hindsight is always 20/20, but the timing of this call so close to the alleged homicide is deeply troubling. The broader issue of mental health care access and recognition is also central here. Neighbors and relatives said things like, "It should have never come to this," suggesting that maybe there were observable, concerning behaviors before things reached a fatal crisis. This points to a potential gap in community awareness of how to recognize and respond to individuals experiencing severe mental health crises, particularly when those crises involve delusional thinking that might not be immediately obvious as a medical emergency to untrained eyes. There's often still a lot of confusion, both in communities and sometimes even among first responders, about when certain behaviors or expressions of belief cross the line from eccentricity or deeply held faith into the realm of pathological delusion that needs psychiatric help. A question often posed in research is stark: how do you know if a patient needs the prayer of an exorcist or the help of a psychiatrist? What's more, the case highlights the challenge of identifying children at risk when the main concerns seem to be about an adult in the household. The sheriff's office had previously responded to domestic issues at the home, but noted there was nothing involving the child that will lead us to where we're at today. This shows how difficult it is to assess indirect risks to children. If a parent is struggling with severe mental illness, even if they aren't directly abusive in a conventional sense, their ability to safely care for a child can be severely compromised. Paulynice and R'myl living alone created a situation of isolated vulnerability where the child had limited outside protection if his mother's mental state rapidly deteriorated. This tragedy really underscores the urgent need for better integration of mental health services, child welfare systems, and community support networks. Early identification of at-risk individuals and families, solid follow-up on warning signs like extended school absences, and clear pathways for intervention are essential. Preventing future tragedies like the death of Ra'myl Pierre requires not just holding individuals accountable, but also looking at and fixing the systemic vulnerabilities that allow such horrors to unfold. The case of Rhonda Paulynice and the death of her 6-year-old son, Ra'myl Pierre, is a story etched in profound sorrow and deeply unsettling questions. A mother stands accused of killing her child, claiming she was divinely instructed to perform an exorcism. A boy remembered for his bright spirit is lost forever, his future stolen in the very place he should have been safest. As the legal proceedings against Rhonda Paulynice move forward, the heart of this case will likely be her mental state. Was she a woman consumed by a psychotic disorder, her reality so fractured that she genuinely believed she was acting on God's will, unable to grasp the horrific nature of her actions? Or will the law find her criminally responsible for her son's death, despite her bizarre and tragic claims? The preliminary autopsy not refuting her account of suffocation only adds another layer to the complex legal road ahead. Beyond the courtroom, this tragedy forces us all to take a hard look at ourselves as a society. It highlights the critical need for more vigilant child welfare checks, earlier and more effective mental health interventions, and a much greater understanding of the complex ways religious beliefs can sometimes become tragically tangled with severe mental illness. How do we better protect vulnerable children in homes where a caregiver is descending into psychosis? How do we make sure that cries for help or observable signs of extreme distress, like that medical issue call the day before R'myl's death, lead to meaningful intervention? The questions that linger are haunting. What exactly were the contents of Rhonda Paulynice's delusions beyond the command to exorcise? What was her mental state during those days and weeks she lived with her deceased son, waiting for him to come back? What, if any, support systems were around her, and why did they fail to prevent this outcome? The death of R'myl Pierre is a stark, painful reminder of the devastating consequences when the lines between faith and delusion blur into violence, and when individuals in profound crisis fall through the cracks of our societal safety nets. It's a call for deeper understanding, greater vigilance, and a renewed commitment to protecting the most innocent among us. The echoes of this case will resonate for a long, long time, a somber testament to a little boy lost and the psychological abyss that consumed his mother. The details of this case are profoundly disturbing and bring up so many complex questions about mental health, faith, and what our responsibilities are as a society. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of harm, severe mental distress, or what feels like a break from reality, please know that help is available. We encourage you to share your thoughts on this case respectfully in the comments section. What aspects of this tragedy do you find most troubling or thought-provoking? And if you believe it's important to explore these difficult cases to help us understand and push for change, please consider subscribing to our channel for more in-depth analyses.